Hello, folks. We're going to get started in this roundtable discussion in a couple minutes. So hang tight and we'll be right back with you. Hello and welcome to the third in a series of roundtable discussions brought to you by the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power in partnership with the Network for Global Innovation. Hello, I'm Fred Wolty. I'm the CEO of the Network for Global Innovation, and I'm going to be your host today. You know, the purpose of these sessions really are to increase our collective understanding of the challenges in transitioning from where we are now to a carbon-free economy, hopefully by 2050. We always try to ask the question, how do we get there? What do we need to do? So these sessions tend to have a more practical slant. And you'll see today, there are a couple of really good case histories on the ground on what's happening. Because we're a global organization, we tend to have a global perspective. In the first couple of sessions we had experts from the US, Mexico, Brazil, Italy, Germany, and India. Now, you out there, the audience, are also from around the world. Your engineers, your CEOs, your investors, you're from the world of academia, you're climate activists, and you are from, as we speak now, from Azerbaijan, Belgium, Brazil, Canada, Croatia, Egypt, Greece, Hong Kong, India, Italy, Qatar, Sweden, and of course, the US. I have the opportunity of speaking with our members. We have about 30 members in 24 countries on a contingent basis, and they've been bringing up hydrogen in various contexts over the last 6 months. And so I thought maybe I would, so it's a very popular subject. I don't think there's a more timely subject for those of us in the fighting climate change business. So I thought I might read a couple of headlines from publications from around the world to give you a flavor of what people are talking about. First one from Germany. Germany eyes world's cheapest green hydrogen from Namibia. Japan, Australia, green hydrogen supply chain possibilities to be studied. Okay. One of my favorites, China approves renewable mega project for green hydrogen. Indian summit focuses on PM's green hydrogen mission. And closer to home, at least NGIN's home, LA green hydrogen hub developers map out role for gas pipeline and storage. So everybody's talking about it, but the purpose of, and the title of this session is, why are we talking about hydrogen and why are we talking about it now? Okay. And I thought maybe I'd give you a couple of answers to that, and then we'll get into our program. The first reason, of course, is that the world is getting more serious at attacking the climate change issue and trying to get to a carbon neutral economy by 2050. Certainly those of us in the US with the new administration, it's a very top of the mind objective. And so we're talking a lot about that. When you start to think about, well, how do we get there, and start to think of it seriously, you come to a couple of conclusions. So the second reason why it's on everybody's mind is that when you look at how do we decarbonize the economy, well, experts think that only about 80% is capable of being done by electrification. It's that last 10 to 20% that's so difficult and so expensive that hydrogen probably will play a role. It will play a role in those hard to decarbonize sectors like, for instance, long haul goods movement, planes, trains, trucks. It's going to play a role in decarbonizing certain manufacturing processes and as feedstock. So experts think that the role of hydrogen is going to be increasingly important as we start to this process of decarbonizing the world. The next reason, of course, that hydrogen is being talked about now is its cost is coming down. The cost of green hydrogen is primarily two areas, and we're only going to talk about green hydrogen today, although we're going to talk about different colors as a definition. The primary cost in making green hydrogen is the cost of renewable energy. And we all know that the cost of renewable energy has been plummeting the last couple of years. It will continue to plummet. So the cost of making hydrogen is going to be reduced as a result. And the second component, second major component of making green hydrogen is electrolysis and electrolyzers. I'm never going to get that right. Anyways, they're being reduced. In the last 5 years, they've come down by about 50%. So it's all good news, but really we're just in the very beginning. Because over 90%, I don't know, I've read 99% of all hydrogen, and hydrogen today, by the way, is a very big business. 99% of all hydrogen is made from either coal or natural gas. And when you look at the numbers, we have to reduce the cost of making green hydrogen from today by 90% to make it cost competitive. So we have challenges ahead, and in my mind, that makes this session so important because this is the chance. We're right in the very beginning of the hydrogen economy, and it's important that we all have a lot to learn, and that's the purpose of this session, is to start the learning process for those of us. And we're going to try to cover two broad areas. What's the theory or practice of hydrogen, and then some practical applications. We have 4 parts of the program today. The first part is the keynote presentation, the hydrogen primer for the green economy. And that's going to be given by Bob Musselman, who is an EIR at the Los Angeles Clean Tech Incubator and a highly successful entrepreneur. And I'll give you more about Bob in a second. After Bob talks about the basics of hydrogen, what is it, where does it come from, what is its properties. Then we're going to go into 2 case histories on its application. And the first of those 2 case histories is going to focus on the utility business, and specifically the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power's project to decommission a coal plant in Utah and make a hydrogen plant out of it. And we have Kevin Peng, who is the project manager. He's been with LADWP for 10 years, and he's going to talk to us about how he's coming on that. This is leading edge stuff, by the way, folks. No other utility in the world is doing this, and they're in the process of building it as we speak. So once again, it's practical kinds of things. And the second case history is focused on transportation, another major potential use of hydrogen. And I don't think there's a better person to talk about that than Professor David Blechman from California State University, Los Angeles. The reason why he's so right for that, of course, among other things, is, David, you're brilliant, but you also have more experience in running a hydrogen fueling station than many other people around the world. They've been running this hydrogen fueling station since 2014. So we're going to have theory, and then we're going to have some applications, and then the last part is my favorite part, which is going to be Q&A from those of you out there, and some discussion. We will take your questions. I think we're going to try to have time for that. As we go along, if you have questions, please enter them in the chat box. Give us your name and where you're from so we can have a little bit of context. Okay, so without further ado, I'd like to introduce Bob. Bob Musselman is an entrepreneur, been a successful entrepreneur. He's an entrepreneur today. He and I met 10 years ago when we began the Los Angeles Clean Tech Incubator, and Bob was one of the senior, if not the senior, executive in residence there. And about 4 years ago, Bob gave a talk on climate change. And it was the first time I really kind of understood the science behind climate change and why greenhouse gases are called greenhouse gases, why it disrupts the weather. I really, for the first time, understood that. Bob has this innate ability to make complicated things easier to understand for guys like myself. And so we've asked Bob to talk to us about the basics of hydrogen. And without any further ado, Bob.
Fred, thank you very much for that introduction. I told Fred when he asked me to present this overview of hydrogen that I was not a hydrogen expert. But the advantage, I think, of having to study the hydrogen market is that I might be able to highlight what's important to understand in the basics. And I've got 2 hydrogen experts that'll follow me to correct any misstatements: Kevin Peng from the LA Department of Water and Power and Professor David Blechman from Cal State LA. So, starting out, what is the core problem that hydrogen is solving? And that is that when we burn any kind of fossil fuel or hydrocarbon, it produces carbon dioxide. And if you look at the formula on the upper left, you'll see HC. The HC stands for hydrocarbon. Now, most hydrocarbons have longer formulations. Natural gas, is CH4, but certain petroleum products, have much longer molecule chains. But when you mix that, when you burn that, oxidize it with oxygen, you create water vapor and energy. But in all cases, you're also producing CO2, and of course, CO2 is the bad actor in climate change. The hydrocarbons that we're burning almost always start out as animals and plants. You and I are made up of hydrocarbons, except for the water part, and so are trees and grass. But when animals and plants on Earth millions of years ago, died and they became fossil fuels. So oil, wood, coal, natural gas are all basically dead animals and plants. And in every fossil fuel plant, when we burn hydrocarbons, we produce carbon dioxide, and that's the core problem we want to solve. We want to get rid of the carbon in energy production. So let's say we just burn hydrogen, which is combustible all by itself. You can see in this new formula that all we get out is water vapor and energy, no carbon dioxide. So no carbon in, no carbon out, no carbon dioxide. One way to do this is in a gas turbine, very similar to the turbines that we currently use to burn natural gas or methane. The turbine has to be modified to deal with the higher temperatures in burning hydrogen, but the process is pretty much the same. We turn the chemical energy of hydrogen into heat, which produces the mechanical work of the turning turbine, which drives a generator, which produces electricity. Now, there is another way to burn hydrogen, and that's through the chemical reaction inside of a fuel cell, skipping the heat and mechanical energy steps. But the chemical reaction is the same. Hydrogen is combined with oxygen from the air, producing water and energy, in this case, electrical energy directly. Hydrogen in, hydrogen out, with no combustion and no carbon dioxide. So hydrogen can be used to generate electrical energy in a combustion turbine or a fuel cell without producing CO2. Kevin Pang will go into a lot more detail later in describing a LADWP project that does just that. But hydrogen has a much larger role to play in removing carbon from the atmosphere. The mechanical energy from hydrogen can be used directly or indirectly for transportation. We can provide combustion heat for use in industry, like cement kilns or for heating buildings. And hydrogen is already used for industry as feedstock for fertilizers, plastics, and glass. But perhaps the most important near-term factor in commercializing hydrogen technology is hydrogen's use in storing electricity from renewable energy. We can use the variable inputs from solar, wind, and hydro to make hydrogen, and then store hydrogen indefinitely and deploy it to provide a supply which is not in line with demand. And we can do this in a very large scale and for larger durations than we can with batteries. So let's have a look at what a hydrogen grid might look like. In the upper left-hand corner, you see under production, you'll see renewable energy sources which drive hydrogen production in electrolyzers. We'll talk about electrolyzers in a minute, but basically electrolyzers split water, H2O, into hydrogen and oxygen and send the hydrogen through pipes or storage tanks where it's needed. We can store vast amounts of hydrogen in underground caverns and further deploy hydrogen for use in utility scale electric production, industrial uses, transportation, or for buildings for heat. One big advantage that hydrogen has over other molecules like natural gas or gasoline is that we can store more energy in a given weight of hydrogen than we can, say, in gasoline or diesel. This is known as energy density. However, hydrogen is a gas at ambient temperature. It takes up more volume than, say, gasoline, so that's a disadvantage. We can partially compensate for that by compressing hydrogen gas so it takes up less volume. In a hydrogen-driven car, for example, we compress the gas to about 700 bar, or 10,000 pounds per square inch, before we pump it into the car's hydrogen tank. That fuel tank is about twice as big as the one in a gasoline car for the same range, but it weighs a lot less. So there are advantages and disadvantages. But the main advantage of hydrogen is that no carbon dioxide is released, and its fuel tanks are still a lot smaller than the batteries take up in, say, an electrical vehicle, which is also carbon-free. If there's one key lesson in this entire presentation, it's the importance of hydrogen and energy storage. Renewable energy from solar and wind cannot produce a carbon-free economy without massive energy storage. We all know that solar and wind are variable and are not matched with demand. That's true both on a daily basis and also on a seasonal basis over periods of months. So we need very large-scale energy storage to make renewables work. Batteries are only good for small storage in the 1 megawatt hour range and good for hours at a time. We can compress air into underground caverns and release that air to drive turbines on a scale to about 1,000 megawatt hours. But that's limited by geographical features and shorter scale, like a day. In pumped hydro, renewable energy can supply energy to pump water, say, from a river up to a mountaintop reservoir, and it's released back to the river to get back that electricity over longer periods of time, but still limited by available geographical features. The stars on the chart above are examples of storage systems. Beacon and Castaic, for example, are LADWP projects, by the way. One is a utility scale battery and the other is pumped hydro. But only hydrogen can store energy in the hundreds of gigawatt hours and for periods of months. So if hydrogen is going to be required to enable renewable energy to fill its ultimate mission, then a hydrogen infrastructure is inevitable. And this is why hydrogen cannot be discounted in a carbon-free, environmentally sustainable future. So how is hydrogen used today? Virtually all hydrogen, like 100%, is used as chemical feedstock. About half of that is for producing petrochemicals, and about 40-some% for producing ammonia. And most of the ammonia is used for fertilizer. We'll talk more about ammonia later. But again, as of today, less than 1%, far less than 1% of hydrogen is used for power and transportation, and that has to change. So where is all the hydrogen in the universe, or more importantly, on Earth? Our sun and all the stars that you can see in the sky are mostly hydrogen. Solar energy comes from fusion energy, when that hydrogen in the stars is pressed together or fused to form larger atoms. There's hydrogen in the atmosphere, but a very small percentage. As you can see in the chart, air is mostly just nitrogen and oxygen. Hydrogen is also tied up in hydrocarbons in the form of living plants and animals, and dead ones in the form of fossil fuels. But the hydrogen that we can access for fuel is in water. Each molecule of H2O is 2 hydrogen atoms tied to 1 oxygen atom. And if we split these water atoms up, we can release the hydrogen for carbon-free energy production. If we split it up using renewable energy, we call this green hydrogen. But there are many colors of hydrogen, depending on the method of hydrogen production. To the right of the vertical line, you'll see gray hydrogen. Almost all of the hydrogen in the world today and used in industry is gray hydrogen. Gray hydrogen is made through steam methane reforming, which is a way of extracting hydrogen from natural gas. We'll talk about this in more detail, but it results in a lot of carbon dioxide being released. On the far left, you'll see blue hydrogen, which can produce less CO2. It's essentially the same as gray hydrogen, except that we capture as much of the CO2 as we can, but we can't capture all of it. Just to the right of that, you see green hydrogen. This is what we want. We use renewable energy, which produces no CO2, to split water into hydrogen and oxygen through electrolysis. The other colors on the screen are brown hydrogen, which is similar to gray, to the methane reforming, but it starts with coal and uses a different process, still produces CO2. Other than green hydrogen, the only way to produce hydrogen with no CO2 is to use nuclear power instead of classic renewables to drive electrolysis. And we call this pink hydrogen. I do want to show how methane reforming works, because almost all hydrogen today is used in this process. We start out with methane, CH4. So and that's essentially natural gas. We mix methane with steam. We go through some processes, and at the end of that process, we end up with hydrogen. But because we have carbon going into the process through the methane, carbon's got to come out of the process, and it comes out of the process using CO2. And of course, this defeats the whole purpose of making hydrogen for clean energy, because we've already released CO2 in the atmosphere before we get the hydrogen. Again, we can capture some of that hydrogen, if not, but not all of it, and there are methane losses along the way. Green hydrogen, oops. So finally, here's how we make green hydrogen. In a system called an electrolyzer. We use electricity to split water molecules into hydrogen and oxygen. When I was on submarines years ago, we were underwater for 3 months at a time, and we had to make our own oxygen. We used exactly the same process, except that we pumped the hydrogen overboard and kept the oxygen to breathe. Electrolyzers do the same thing, except that we release the hydrogen to the atmosphere and keep the hydrogen. About 80% of the cost of producing hydrogen in this method is the cost of the renewable energy used to power the electrolyzer. And as Fred indicated, the cost of that renewable energy is going down every year. The process itself is being improved, again, for example, by using waste heat from industrial processes to heat the water in the electrolyzer so it takes less electrical energy to break up the water molecules. So we're improving the economy and efficiency of producing green hydrogen every year. In this slide, you can see the electrolyzer we just discussed next to a fuel cell that we reviewed earlier. As a process, there are mirror images of each other. To make hydrogen and electrolyzer, we have electricity and water going in, we get hydrogen and oxygen out. In a fuel cell, it's the opposite, with hydrogen and oxygen in and electricity and water out. Now, if we combine the two in an energy cycle, here's what we get. On the left, we have renewable energy in the form of electricity going in from the left. We can make hydrogen with an efficiency today of about 60%. The hydrogen is stored and then deployed ultimately to a fuel cell where it generates electricity at its point of use with an efficiency of about 40%. So the round trip efficiency is therefore about 24%. It's not great, but it's all driven by solar and wind, and no CO2 is produced. If we think with further commercial development, we can double this efficiency, and many companies are on the way to achieving this goal. Well, back to energy production. As Kevin Peng of LADWP will confirm later, we're interested in green hydrogen in the form of electrolysis. But you'll hear a lot about blue hydrogen from methane reforming and carbon capture. Yes, blue hydrogen is cleaner than gray hydrogen without carbon capture, but the net effect of blue hydrogen is still more CO2 in the atmosphere. On one positive note, in the United States infrastructure bill that's working its way through the US Congress, it does support hydrogen infrastructure, but the bill defines clean hydrogen at a level that it will subsidize not only green hydrogen, but many blue hydrogen systems. Many environmentalists would rather see the bill support only green hydrogen production. The future of the hydrogen economy involves a lot of niche subjects, and one of them is ammonia. I already mentioned that almost half of hydrogen today is used to make ammonia, mainly for fertilizer. What's interesting about ammonia is that it carries a lot of hydrogen, 3 atoms worth with every nitrogen atom, and no carbon is involved. And ammonia is a liquid at ambient temperature. So ammonia is a convenient way to store and transport hydrogen. We can make ammonia from green hydrogen, ship it across the ocean, and then economically convert it back to hydrogen, releasing the nitrogen and not producing any additional CO2. Later this morning, Professor Blechman will talk about the specifics of hydrogen and transportation. But as an introduction, pretty much every form of transport is developing hydrogen alternatives. You're most familiar with hydrogen cars, which are already in the market, using compressed hydrogen tanks to power fuel cells that drive the car with electric motors. Hydrogen trains are already in use with similar power systems. Some smaller ships use compressed hydrogen, but larger ships will probably use liquid hydrogen instead of compressed gas. And Airbus has committed to having a hydrogen-powered commercial jet in use by 2035 using liquid nitrogen stored behind the passenger section in the dark blue in this rendition to drive hydrogen turbojets. So what's a hydrogen power car look like? Hydrogen is pumped into a high pressure gas tank or a gas tank at about 10,000 PSI or about 700 bar. The hydrogen drives fuel cells, which generate electricity, which power an electric drive chain. Now, if you want to compare here the efficiency of an electric vehicle to a hydrogen automobile, this slide shows that the hydrogen cycle from renewable energy generation to power the wheels is less efficient than the electric vehicle. Why? Because in the electric vehicle, there's no conversion back and forth from electrical to chemical energy as with hydrogen. But hydrogen does have advantages: faster refueling, longer range, less weight, and a smaller volume than batteries. And batteries today will typically not last the life of a car, so they need replacement, increasing the capital cost. But ultimately, the forcing function, as I mentioned before, is that renewable energy is not deployable at utility scale without storage. And that storage will probably be hydrogen in the long term, and that will drive the hydrogen market. And so I'll summarize that hydrogen is driven by the storage requirement. And why now is also driven by the storage requirement if we were to make the total transition to renewables. Yes, there are other reasons here like cost factors, but major governments are realizing this and are driving the hydrogen train. The European Union, UK, Japan, and Australia are also on board. And the US will ultimately head in that direction either sooner or later. And with that, I'll turn it back to Fred Walty for the next segment.
Thanks, Bob. Really fascinating. I've written down a couple of questions. I know I've seen some other questions coming in. Those in the audience who have questions, please write them in the chat and we'll go forward. Okay, so now we're going to move from the basics of understanding hydrogen to one of its most important applications, which is in the generation and storage of electricity. The Los Angeles Department of Water and Power, which is the largest municipally owned utility in the country, has been doing a lot of work in that. And if many of you may know, we have had a partnership with LADWP back from my days at LACI. This year, LADWP did a study and released the results called the LA100 study. And it is essentially taking a look at 5 different paths on how the utility could get to 100% renewable energy, no carbon. Very brave study, great. And I urge you to go look at it and look at it. But the result was in every path, hydrogen had a role to play in either generation storage of energy. So I'm really pleased today to have Kevin Pang here, who is the project director of the Intermountain power generation project, which simply stated is they have a coal plant in Utah and they're going to try to make it into or decommission it and then make a hydrogen plant out of it. Leading edge stuff. So Kevin, thank you for coming, and it's to you.
Thank you so much, Fred, and truly an honor to be in the presence of the minds that are on the phone. I know Bob had said that I might be an expert in hydrogen. I certainly don't think that we'll be an expert until we hit 2025 when the plant is up and running, and definitely looking forward to David's presentation as well on the forefront of everything that's happening right here in the Cal State LA area. So yeah, here to talk about the Intermountain Power Project Renewed. So, you know, what the project means to LADWP, who is a participant in the project and purchases energy, is that it provides a roadmap to a carbon-free generation future. So just a bit of the background of the project generally. So what IPP Renewed scope includes is the retirement of the existing coal plant facility 2 years earlier than originally planned. California regulations back in the early 2000s prohibited utility companies from investing in any coal infrastructure, and it really provided an opportunity for the Intermountain Power Agency, who are the owner of the generation and transmission assets, to identify a generation technology that we can move forward with that would help supply generation technology that would support California's regulatory requirements of moving towards a 100% carbon-free future by 2045, and also LADWP's internal goals of hitting additional renewable portfolio standards earlier. So the project will be including the build out of a new green hydrogen and natural gas fuel generation unit. We've purchased the gas turbines, steam turbines, and the HRSG from Mitsubishi Power, as well as Nutter Ericsson on the boiler side. There are current partners in moving forward with the gas turbine technology and starting the design of the balance of plant and the entire facility. That is one of the first municipal-led projects that are purpose-built specifically to operate on green hydrogen technology starting in 2025. So in 2025, we'll be operating with a 30% blend of hydrogen, green hydrogen by volume, and we have planned transitions from 30% all the way up to 100% hydrogen fueled operation by 2045. The other portion of the project that it's being driven by LADWP and Intermountain Power Agency is the hydrogen production and storage project. This will provide grid scale long duration energy storage services for all of the IPP participants. of which there's 35 municipalities that we serve that are spread across California, Utah, and Nevada, of which LADWP is one of those participants. And when we really take a step back and look at what the vision of what IPP really needs to be, we really need to make IPP an example of green energy for the world to follow. When we look at all the different resources that I'll talk about later on in my presentation, we have all the different parts and pieces that provide us the highest probability of success in implementing a project like IPP Renewed that includes green hydrogen, that includes the ability to tap into long duration energy storage. And it provides something in the tool belt for our participants to meet some of the challenges of increasing renewable energy penetration inside the Western grid. So when we look at how we unlock IPP's green hydrogen potential, we had to first just identify the resources that we had available to us. And those come in the form of proximity to regional renewables in the area, from solar, from wind in the Wyoming regions, as well as geothermal in Nevada, and all the California solar that we're tied into as part of LADWP's balancing authority. We also have an existing large-scale infrastructure system on the transmission side. So we have 2,400 megawatts, so a large DC transmission line that connects the heart of the IPP facility in the Delta, Utah, to the California entities. And we have transmission networks on the northern side that connect us to networks and grid systems in Utah as well as Nevada. When we had first built the plant, we had procured land and water rights that provide us the opportunity to really help form and shape and really transform IPP from this coal-fired facility to one that meets the clean requirements of a green energy future. And one of the most unique things that we have, and it really was just happenstance. So the forefathers of IPP, when they chose the site, it was a coincidence that we were directly across the street from these really unique geological structures called salt caverns. And the salt caverns have the ability to store just massive amounts of green hydrogen, of fuel, and it's currently being utilized by Magnum to store fuel and services for other customers. But when we look at the ability and the quantity and the capacity of these salt domes, it really allows us the ability to transition pretty quickly from a storage standpoint, from the 30% target in 2025 to the 100% target in 2045. And finally, the last one and the most important for me are the human resources that we have available at the facility. The Intermountain Power Service Corporation is the entity of operations, maintenance, and technical staff that have been operating the units since the 1980s. And it'll be an easy transition for those individuals that are highly trained, highly skilled, and highly capable to move into any generation and transmission facility asset that we choose to move forward with. So with all these 5 different pieces, I guess I wanted to communicate the importance of, we understand that IPP with access to each one of these resources is pretty unique in the world. When we look at how we find solutions around green hydrogen as a whole, there's a lot of other approaches that we need to take if it's a greenfield site that doesn't have access to transmission networks, or if it's being built inside a very robust and vetted system. There's different constraints, and it really needs to be approached from a site-specific standpoint. But the lucky thing for us is that we do have access to these 5 different things, and it provides us kind of the backbone that we can build a project like IPP Green Hydrogen or IPP Renewed on. So what are we trying to do? The intent of the project is really to create an energy hub at IPP that provides conversion and storage services for renewable energy interconnections for all participants in the Delta region, as well as spread across California, Nevada, and Utah. So the map on the right kind of shows geographically where we're situated. We're right there in central Utah, and we have these transmission lines that cross Nevada all the way over into California. And the majority of the energy from the project, actually around 80%, will flow down south to the California entities. But in terms of the number of participants that we serve, the majority are actually in Utah. So when we look at what this energy hub really means and why it makes sense here, even geographically. We currently have 370 megawatts of wind interconnects that bring wind energy directly to the IPP station. And we have an additional 2.3 gigawatts of solar interconnect requests that are inside the queue. And those are solar interconnects that can bring energy directly into IPP to either serve the electrolyzers or to serve native load for our participants. In addition, we have 1,500 megawatts of Wyoming wind interconnects that are being discussed and evaluated as a part of our long-term resource planning group. And obviously, all of this proximity means that we have a lot of renewables that we can have potential access to. And we have, I had highlighted these salt caverns directly across the street that allows us to integrate all of those renewable energies in the event that they would have been curtailed. And I have another slide here showing the excess surplus months and deficit months, but in the surplus months to store that energy inside those salt caverns and shift that energy to deficit months when we need it the most. So this is a slide on surplus and deficits that we're seeing inside the California energy markets today. So in 2021, we hit a high of renewable energy excess in March of 2021 of about 300,000 megawatt hours. So, and this is currently right at about 30% renewable integration. As we see higher and higher levels of renewable integration, renewable energy inside the portfolio, that excess will just get worse. And the chart on the right shows the months where we had excess, so excess renewable energy production that had to be either curtailed, sold off into the market, or funneled into storage. And then you see in the gray, the renewable energy deficit months. So around January to March, and then from October or so, September to December, we see these renewable energy deficit months. So what a project like IPP can do is it provides true long duration grid level energy storage. But the most important part of that is really the ability for us to shift renewable energy from the surplus months, where we have just excess capacity and it's being curtailed, over into the months where we need it the most, where renewable energy is at a low. So I think Bob had highlighted, and this was a very important point for us, that the only green hydrogen, or the only hydrogen that IPP is interested in pursuing, is really green hydrogen, for all the reasons that he had listed in his presentation. But when we look at just a simple block diagram of the process that we have, we'll have renewable energy flowing into electrolyzers. Currently, we're evaluating the technologies, and there's quite a few out there to convert electricity and water into hydrogen. But using electrolysis, we can create the hydrogen using the renewables that are curtailed in the system, or direct connect renewables in the start of the project, store them in these large salt caverns, and then utilize them for electricity generation at the tail end. And everything in the middle of electrolysis and storage, that's really where we get long duration energy storage. That's where we get the seasonal shifting, these month-long durations of storage. And it gives us an opportunity really to tackle some of the challenges that we see with renewable energy integration, and then eventually 100% clean grid in LA. So I'll go ahead and end there. I'll flash this on the screen. If there's interest in additional information, you can go to the ipautah.com /IPP-renewed website. That's where we have updated information about the projects, things about the schedule. But with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Fred Welty, for continuing the discussion. Appreciate the opportunity.
Thanks, Kevin. Very interesting. I'm already seeing lots of questions coming out. And for those of you looking and listening, write your questions in the chat box. So now we're going to move to the next part of our presentation, which is focusing on the application of hydrogen in the transportation world. Professor David Blechman, who is a professor of sustainable technology at California State University, Los Angeles, and he's also the 2019-2020 Fulbright Distinguished Chair in Alternative Energy Technology at Chalmers University. I don't know if there's a better person for us to talk about this. He's an expert not only in transportation, but in hydrogen in general. David, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Fred, and thank you, Kevin. Very interesting presentation. Thank you, Robert, for priming us for upcoming presentation. So my name is David Blechman. I'm a professor of technology at Cal State LA, and I would like to present some insight on our experiences of operating hydrogen research and fueling facility on campus, and also a little bit more vision about hydrogen applications and how hydrogen economy is developing moving forward. I'm very excited about this topic because a lot of things have been happening over past couple of years. It was slow for many years, and now it's super accelerated. Cal State LA, I believe, is a very unique university because now we have a whole suite of sustainable energy technologies. We have very large network for electrical vehicle charging. We have a very large solar installation. We're operating our hydrogen station and some other projects that we have completed. It's very unique, and it's an urban university. We don't have a lot of land, and yet we were able to introduce so many sustainable technologies in one place. And of course, a jewel in our collection is Cal State LA Hydrogen Fueling Facility. In reality, the project started in the early 2000s. I joined in 2007, and then we were able to secure funding, very key funding from California Air Resources Board, DOE, QMD, and many others. And so we built this beautiful facility 2010, 2011, and then it took a few years. It's new state-of-the-art technology back then. It was the largest facility at the time. So state-of-the-art when we built it, and we had a grand opening in 2014 and operated ever since pretty much nonstop. So the specifications of this facility is that we can produce our own 60 kilograms a day of hydrogen from electrolysis. And now that we built in 2020 our own solar system on campus, this hydrogen is through trade of solar credits is 100% renewable hydrogen at our station. And it's very attractive to many customers. On the left of this picture, you can see 3 tanks that contain 60 kilograms. At the time when we built our station, it was state of the art, and it was the largest station or one of the largest stations in California. But now modern stations are built over 400 kilograms a day, capable of over 400 kilograms a day. Up to new plants are 1.5 tons of hydrogen per day. So now it's becoming a little bit of obsolete, and we are looking for funding, applying for grants to expand our capacity. But the main goal remains the same. It's an academic environment. We do research with our equipment, and we also train students and conduct research. So the compressor in the middle compresses hydrogen from electrolyzer and stores it in the storage tanks up to 400 bar. And when the vehicle comes, we use blue compressors on the right to boost it all the way to 700 bar fueling to the vehicle. And also we have, you can see on the right, a chiller. And chillers are an important aspect of fueling process that allow us to speed up a process of fueling. For example, our station operates at -20 degrees Celsius, and we fuel 4 to 5 kilograms in 10 minutes. Where more modern stations operate at -40 degrees Celsius, and the fuelings are super convenient at 3 to 5 minutes, just like you would have at a gasoline station. So one of the studies we conducted after several years operating our hydrogen station is putting together a failure by component map. So we accumulated over the years what was failing in our journal, and other reports. And one summer I had a very talented high school student that put together these graphics and helped us to have a more holistic look how, hydrogen station, which is technically a complex plant. We have computers, we have sensors, we have heavy duty equipment. What was failing when, and you can see the red bars is the some component failures in year one that needed a lot of things to be addressed. Then year two, we had problems with the dispenser. Year three, we started having problems with the chiller. And electrolyzer, we had to address certain things as we moved along over the years. But you can see by year four, a lot of those failures and a lot of teething problems we were able to overcome. But what we learned is that you need an inventory of parts, and a map like this allows you to think through what parts you would need to store for immediate replacement. Otherwise, you might be waiting a few weeks to get replacement parts from manufacturer. And we helped other stations and they returned our parts back, but sometimes we landed our inventory to others. Another interesting program we were able to introduce is a shared mobility program that faculty and students were able to take advantage. We started late in 2018, and unfortunately, due to COVID, we ceased the program. But at its height, it was operating 18 vehicles, very popular, and it also created additional usage for our hydrogen station, so we could reap certain benefits. For example, we did studies when we fueled cars back to back early in this learning process about operating hydrogen stations. Now we are operating 7 vehicles and the rest we return to Hyundai, but we really appreciate that opportunity to work with Hyundai in their first generation Tucson fuel cell vehicles. They were very reliable, very simple to operate vehicles. We did many hydrogen projects, and I just wanted to show you one of the interesting highlight projects that was sponsored by Metropolitan Water District of Southern California. And it was a senior design. I tasked for students to design a passive cooling device that would capture water from the exhaust of a fuel cell vehicle. As Bob introduced, hydrogen and oxygen is combined in a fuel cell to produce electricity. But a byproduct is water, and it comes out as a vapor. So we were thinking that in some emergency situations, or for people who want to just collect water in the desert environment and just pour water at the end of the day on their flowers, we could create this water capture device. And it consists of a special designed compact heat exchanger. And then on the bottom, you have a reversible water droplet separator. And then from that separator, it uses cyclonic flow and a reverse flow. Water droplets drop in, and you can see our results on the bottom. From 1 kilogram of hydrogen on which you can drive 65 miles, you will produce 9 kilograms of water. And so here are results that at about 50 degrees Fahrenheit, we would produce up to 1/3, capture 1/3 of the water, 3 liters. And then at 70 degrees, it will be 2 liters, and at higher temperatures, it will be 1.5 liters. So it's a relatively effective system without air conditioning, without cooling, using any power. And another project, and this is it kind of introduces the rest of my presentation, where we talk about applications of hydrogen. In 2018, my students designed this hydrogen economy map. We call it power to gas, so producing hydrogen from renewable sources, just like a LADWP project. Then you can use artificially built storage or natural caverns. to store it intermittently or seasonally. And then hydrogen is a universal energy carrier and a universal fuel that can replace fossil fuels. So hydrogen can be effectively utilized in residential, industrial environment. In Sweden, I visited um, people who were using hydrogen to produce steel, high quality steels, with reducing it without coke. And also ammonia production and many other applications in industrial, and also in commercial buildings using just fuel cells. You can install local fuel cells and produce electricity for the buildings. And of course, another direction is using hydrogen as a fuel in passenger cars or in heavy-duty transportation, which has received a lot of attention lately, especially for long-haul heavy-duty transportation. Here is a Nikola truck. And also there is a whole variety of other industries that can use hub type of hydrogen. So it could be FedEx and UPS vehicles, port applications, and shipping, maritime shipping, trains, long distance or switch locomotives, and forklifts is a great application. And even at airports, ground equipment, or as we heard, Airbus is working on the liquid hydrogen applications. So a first example I would like to present is passenger vehicles. That's the first what we've seen in applications of fuel cells in transportation. And as a matter of fact, I just recently had an article in Forbes. The best used car deal on the block is a hydrogen powered sedan. And that's the vehicle on the left. It's a first generation Toyota Mirai that came off lease, and now they're introduced to public again. After lease, they're sold under $20,000. You still get government incentives for purchasing this vehicle and a $15,000 fueling car. So you fuel for free at hydrogen stations. So to understand this picture, it's a trailer truck brought a vehicle for sale. So when it was serviced, it was empty of hydrogen, but now before selling it to their new customer, it's being refueled. So those vehicles are brought to our station and refueled. We see them quite often and regularly. Those sales go through the roof. Please read the article. Other entries are next generation Hyundai Nexo. Beautiful vehicle. Again, it's a picture at our station, and we are looking forward to the upcoming BMW X7 series. So California is leading the world in introducing passenger vehicles. We already have about 11,000 on our roads, and people around the world they make rogue purchases. They buy vehicles and bring them across the pond just to have the cars from United States on that secondary market. And what we can see on the right, on the bottom, is that we are planning to see about up to 27,000 vehicles in a few years. And also there is an optional period when other OEMs can introduce even more fuel cell passenger vehicles. So it's a great choice for transportation. So why is it a great choice? Because we refuel in 3-5 minutes. An electric car can match that. And also we have a great distance of 300 to 400 miles per single fueling on these cars. So that's the very important advantage of those cars. And we're building a very extensive hydrogen network. You can see green stations are open stations, and yellow and purple are planning and in construction already. Our drivers can see where hydrogen is available. It's a picture on the right with locations and green and red. And I took this snapshot from the website at at night. So some of the stations are out of hydrogen and some of them just closed for overnight. Like, for example, our station closes after 5 p.m. Now, another example is heavy duty transportation. As I mentioned, on the top, you can see El Dorado buses built here in California, close to Los Angeles, or e-bus, that was a special built bus, custom built, and it was fueled at Cal State LA before shipping to Delaware. The University of Delaware has a bus program on their campus. And on the bottom, you see a famous Nikola fuel cell truck. And on the top, it's brand new. I just took this picture a week ago at ACT Expo of a Toyota built truck. And what is unique about Toyota, they are utilizing their own fuel cells from Mirai, and they're putting two Mirais, and it actually makes a more efficient, more durable power plant to have two fuel cells in a truck. And also it increases the volume of fuel cells they produce and reliability, because it's a very known. As a matter of fact, the secondary market for fuel cell vehicles, Toyota guarantees 100,000 miles on the fuel cell plant. And I already mentioned that the railroad can benefit from hydrogen. On the top, you see vehicle projects. That's the company Vehicle Projects built a locomotive that utilized a large battery and a large fuel cell for a switch locomotive in the city of Commerce about 10 years ago. It was a demonstration project, very interesting work. And so more modern application of that, there is a light duty train operating in England, built by Alstom, using hydrogenics fuel cell, but now hydrogenics was purchased by Cummins. And so we are also expecting heavy duty transportation coming from Cummins very soon. A dear story of hydrogen, I'm sorry, I'm going over time. A dear story of hydrogen is fuel cell forklifts. That is a winning story over electric forklifts, because now we can, in 24/7 operation, we can refuel a forklift in 3-5 minutes instead of hours and hours of recharging electrical vehicle. And so Amazon, Cisco, Walmart, all purchasing now hydrogen forklifts and adapting to their logistics facilities. And the last technical slide is it's an interesting story. On the left, we have a story from France, and on the right, I have a story from Sweden. But they are similar, and there is a little bit difference. They're producing hydrogen from solar power. So on the left, you have an ocean-going yacht, catamaran yacht, that completely covered about 250 square meters of solar. They're producing solar, and also they have wind power, but it's a wind with the sails as wings rather than normal sails. And so solar energy is stored in batteries and in hydrogen during the day. And then during the night or over a long periods of without light, this boat operates hydrogen to propel itself. And on the left, you can see very complex control system but it's very efficient and interesting boat. I would encourage you to read up more on that. It's an energy observer. And on the right, we have a solar house. Built by Hans Olof Nilsson. That's his picture on the bottom. I interviewed him, and there is a video on YouTube. And he built this solar house that he stores energy for a short term in batteries day and night, but for long-term storage. And that's true, you cannot get enough sun in winter in Sweden. So his storage is seasonal of hydrogen, and then he uses a fuel cell to warm up the house and for the electricity in the house. It's very efficient, and he also plans to fuel his fuel cell car in the future because hydrogen is stored under pressure. So here's the two stories. using solar, using hydrogen. French technology is kind of an intermittent a few days, where Sweden is seasonal storage. And I see a lot of analogy to using something like that in Alaska, for example. And as we are transitioning to our Q&A session, I look forward to your questions and other speakers as well, I believe. Thank you. Send me emails if you have more follow-up questions.
Thank you, David. Really interesting. And you guys are doing a lot of, I mean, you're actually training the leaders of tomorrow relative to hydrogen. So it's really pretty important. So we now have, we're moving to the Q&A session. We have a number of really interesting questions, some of which are fairly tough. We'll see if we know the answers to them. I'll read them out and then suggest who might start, but please, anybody can jump in on these. Let me just make sure I can get them here. Okay. And I want to apologize ahead of time. I'm probably going to butcher some of these names, but I'll give it my best shot. The first one is from Himanshu Bankar, and I don't know where Himanshu is from, but he essentially has this question: is hydrogen an option for passenger vehicles for developing countries like India, considering the cost of internal combustion engines versus fuel cells? So that, and as you all may know, we do a lot of work in developing nations as well as developed. So who would like to jump on that one? Since it's transportation, David, do you want to try that one in the beginning? And all of these answers, by the way, have to be kind of to the point because we have a lot of questions we want to get through.
It's complicated because it's a chicken and the egg. So the way we are approaching this issue, it's creating hubs, creating regions. And so in such a way that you can look at the history, how it was developed in California. It took many years. Now things are accelerated and many things are happening. You will have more access to hydrogen. And therefore, overall, we will be transitioning to electric vehicles and hydrogen vehicles in the near future. And what I see is it's more of a question of the need and convenience. So if you're going to be traveling for a long distance, fuel cell vehicles will be great. If you're going to be using your vehicle just for a small urban travel, then most likely it's going to be an electric vehicle. So introduction of hydrogen passenger vehicles really is the matter of convenience for many people. They don't want to fuel or recharge. It's really the cultural and convenience that will be deciding the market in the future. So a lot of people cannot charge their electrical vehicles even in the United States. They're hunting for charging stations just like people hunt for hydrogen stations. But the way we introduce passenger vehicles, we introduce them in the areas that have hydrogen stations. So in the future, it's going to be a combination of heavy duty and passenger vehicles. So once we have heavy duty hydrogen stations, that passenger vehicles, that's where the regions where we can introduce, and that's probably one of the pathways that India can take in decarbonizing their transportation, which is quite interesting. And also there could be a fuel cell bikes.
David, you know, I think you've answered the question, and the real simple answer is India is going to have the same challenges that the other developed countries have in putting hydrogen into the transportation system, probably going to go first into long haul transportation of one kind. But it's clear, I think, that they will follow once the other developed countries happen. Okay, so I want to move to a next question. I don't have a slice idea what the answer to this is. Maybe you guys will, okay? So this is from Dibashul Sarangi. Oh man, did I butcher that? And Dr. Sarangi is from India. And here's his question. Is there any progress to store hydrogen using carbon nanotubes based system? So the question is there any progress to store hydrogen using carbon nanotubes based system? Who wants to jump on that?
I guess I can answer from a practical standpoint for the scale of the project that we're looking at for the Intermountain side. You know, when we're looking at the quantity of hydrogen that's necessary, we're talking about anywhere from 20 to 30 million kilograms per year at the initial case of 30%. And then we're talking about close to 280 million kilograms per year once we get to the 100% case. Really the only practical application for us, if we didn't have cavern storage, was either a storage inside ammonia, which I think Bob, you had mentioned, or we have to go direct connect, so just-in-time production to the hydrogen facility. So for us at our scale, the only option really was salt cavern storage. That's interesting. I've never really heard of that in application, but for us, it's not a practical choice.
I might shine on that a little bit. So when we store hydrogen compressed, it basically still browns motion of those gas molecules, and so it's pretty hard. And so people have experimented with some materials where hydrogen can be stored in a structural lattice of some sorts. And so metal powders are an example of that, specialized metal powders. We can put under less pressure more hydrogen than it would be possible just as a gas, because it gets organized in the lattice of the material. So that's kind of a more of a transportation applications, because for long-term storage we can use caverns or just pressurized vessels. So metal hydride, I know a company that is already working on carbon particle storage, just in a similar fashion. Just remember the parity with the compressed hydrogen is about 6% by weight. So if we can store same amount of hydrogen by 6% by weight, that would be parity. Some people use glass beads, special glass beads for hydrogen, et cetera, et cetera. So there is a research, but it's still cutting edge. And I don't know when it will be commercially available or at the commercial level.
Thank you. Next question is from Pedro Banda. Hello, Pedro. Glad to see you here. His question regards hydrogen and the use of grids, and I just, Kevin, this is probably one that is best for you to answer, but I just want to set the stage. When I was listening to your presentation, my sense was that IPP wasn't just a hydrogen production plant. What it really became was its role is as a storage facility for the entire sustainable energy generation from around the region. And so I think this is kind of gets to that. So do you see the future development in regulations for hydrogen as an integration of renewable electricity into the grid and hydrogen production connected to the grid? Or will a development of renewable facilities dedicated to hydrogen production will make more sense? What will be easier to adopt by current utilities and industry?
Yeah, that's actually a really interesting question, one that we've struggled with as well on our side. So I'll try to answer it in pieces. So the first stage that we have to take as IPP is to start building the infrastructure starting day one. So when we look at IPP as a grid level service provider, it really is providing conversion services. So converting renewable energy into hydrogen back into energy. And it's providing the ability for us to have this long duration energy storage that can, really pursue the seasonal shift. The only way we're really going to be able to take full advantage of hydrogen inside the grid is to tie into grid level energy specifically. I will say that in the very beginning, we'll likely need to see some amount of dedicated renewable energy that's direct tied to the electrolyzer facility. That's really the only way to push the capacity factor or the utilization of those electrolyzers to a point where it's just economically viable. But as we see the scale and the penetration of renewable energy inside the grid increase, we'll also see the potential excess capacity of renewable energy surplus inside the system. And when we're thinking long-term, really this is the leadership at LADWP. When they're developing a project like this, we have to think 10 years, 15 years down the line. And 10 years and 15 years down the line, we'll be close to the revised goal from the mayor from Los Angeles of hitting a 100% clean energy grid by 2035. And at that point, we'll need to see a project like IPP reach additional scales above that rate. So I'm hoping that answers the question, that it's a little bit of a mix in the very beginning, but eventually a project like IPP really comes to shine when you have large scale grid energy, renewable energy that's flowing in the system. And we're utilizing IPP as a curtailment method to shift that to different seasons.
Thanks, Kevin. Okay, the next question is from Paulo Di Rosende, who is a member of the NGIN team. And it's really a question of priorities. And so and it's obviously a judgment, so I'd like to hear from each of you, and we'll probably start with Bob. And Paulo asks, what is the priority for using hydrogen for decarbonizing existing systems and processes? Transportation for long haul, energy storage, industrial processes like steel, maritime transportation? You got to pick one, or is it all of the above? What's the priority, Bob? What do you think the priority is?
Oh, I think the priority is starting with those applications which require, short-term and less expensive capital investment. I mean, if we start piping hydrogen, all over the country, then there are issues associated with embrittlement of pipes and the materials construction of piping systems. The internal modifications have to be made to buildings to actually use hydrogen for heating, that sort of thing. I'm sure Professor Blechman can talk more about that. The nearer term applications are ones that we're building out an infrastructure from scratch and don't have to modify stuff that's already there. So, for example, the obvious one is automobiles, and so we're building automobiles specifically for hydrogen. We're building hydrogen electrolyzers and hydrogen storage specifically for automobiles. We move on to transportation for things like trains, smaller ships. For applications such as airplanes. I mentioned that Airbus is spending a lot of money on developing an airplane a commercial aircraft that'll run on liquid hydrogen, but that's all infrastructure and investment that has to be made for that specific application. But if we look at modifying existing infrastructure to be able to accommodate hydrogen, that's just a longer term. It has to happen, but that's just a longer term application. So things like piping hydrogen, into a cement kiln, or piping hydrogen into commercial buildings for heating, I think is going to take a longer period of time.
So the short answer is those applications that require less capital investment now.
Well, it's more that we don't want to have to rebuild capital investment to structures that are already there. So yeah. we want to build out stuff that's new, and having to reconstruct an infrastructure that's already there is just going to take a longer period of time.
Kevin, what's your point of view?
Yeah, I agree with Bob's points completely. It really has to be this 4, 5, 6, 10-pronged approach where, we understand as a utility industry, we're just one of those prongs. And the hope is that with this project, we're driving both the production and storage industry side with the private entities and developers we're working with. We're also bringing in the technology from the gas turbine side, and we can validate that structure. I think it has to go all the way across the industry, with the gas pipeline industry, with the transportation that Professor Blechman is researching currently, to be able to get to the scale and the economies of scale with hydrogen at the levels that are there to really support full utility energy generation. We really need to have everyone in the mix. And in terms of infrastructure and where we invest, I think Robert's assessment is better than what I can probably provide.
David, do you want to add anything here?
Yes. I would like to take a little bit broader approach than my colleagues here. A good example in Europe, and I'm specifically making that parallel to tie back to LADWP. Europe is planning fuel cell hydrogen joint undertaking to have a highway, a hydrogen highway spanning from Sweden to Italy. And they are going to start by introducing a very large hydrogen pipeline that is fed by some solar resources. For example, it could be from Ukraine or some other countries that will provide hydrogen into the pipeline. And then this pipeline will have very heavy duty industrial applications like a steel making, for example. So now we have a production, large pipeline, and consumption established that can bear some of the capital costs. And then this pipeline will serve as an incubator or accelerator for other technologies to cut into the pipeline, and maybe we can build hydrogen stations along that highway and fill the passenger vehicles, fill the heavy duty trucks. It could be then other commercial buildings and other users of hydrogen as that pipe, whatever, spans certain distance. And I can predict that maybe very soon, LADWP will be fielding phone calls. Can we use some of the hydrogen in your pipeline for our application? It's going to be happening very soon. That's how I envision that. So that's why this project is so exciting.
Your priority remains transportation, which obviously makes some sense. Okay, I want to get into some very specific questions before we run out of time here. The first specific is from Paolo again. What are the hydrogen storage tank specs? Are they more or less strict than, for instance, CNG tanks?
Probably can take. There are 4 types of hydrogen tanks: steel tanks with the wrap but shoulders open. Third type, aluminum tanks completely wrapped in carbon fiber. And fourth type is tanks with a plastic liner and an extra thick layer of carbon fiber wrapped around. And there are 2 certifications. One is Department of Transportation, so these tanks can be used on vehicles. And then there is a SME certification, so that tanks can be used for storage. And so those are very straightforward. The manufacturers have to go through a certain type of testing of those tanks. And of course, they are more stringent than natural gas, because natural gas is 3,600 psi, maybe 250 bar or so. And then hydrogen tanks are 350, 500, and 700 bar. Now there is a development 1,000 bar for storage.
Great. Who are the commercial suppliers of electrolyzers is a question. Kevin, that's definitely you.
Yeah, there's quite a few. The majority of the electrolyzer manufacturers that we've been talking to are obviously overseas in China. But when we're looking at the supply chain, obviously most of that will be coming through from China. I would list the vendors that we have, but there's so many. I'm not sure how to best answer that question in the time that we have, but there's certainly a large section of manufacturers that have vetted hydrogen electrolyzers that we've been interested in pursuing. We're currently looking at and evaluating several, 10 to 15 or so, as a part of our project as a whole. I can't share some of that commercially sensitive information, but the large majority are overseas, and the hope is, with coalitions like this, like the Green Hydrogen Coalition, like some of the projects that we're developing at LADWP, that we're trying to bring some of that manufacturing back into the US as well, so that we can have a global supply chain to tap into.
Next question. How much capacity of hydrogen storage is necessary for a private car to drive 300 to 400 kilometers at a time? That's what, 240 miles, something like that?
That's what we already have on the cars. They drive 300 to 400 kilometers. Usually we can get 100 kilometers on a kilogram Majority of the vehicles have 4 to 5 kilogram tanks.
Great, thank you. We're nearing our end, and I want to just jump in here for a couple questions. The first one, David, my understanding is that your hydrogen fuel station is very unique because you actually make the hydrogen on site. And in reading the challenges to personal mobility with hydrogen, some of the challenges have been transporting hydrogen to the various charging stations, fueling stations that are out there. So do you think that the future has got to be making hydrogen at these stations, or we got to do a better job at transport, or maybe both?
Well, thank you for this question. Of course, it's a new industry and it has all kinds of teething problems and new experiences. We learned how to produce massive amounts of hydrogen for the space program. And so now we are taking these lessons into personal transportation. It's not delivery of hydrogen that is a problem, although some truck, one truck there we had an accident before. It's some of the production facilities that have some failures of sorts that needs to be attention or due to weather events. And therefore, with our facility that produces its own hydrogen from electrolysis, we are not subject to those issues. And so what I would like to encourage is for us to build a flexible network of hydrogen stations. Some of them are delivery and some of them are producing, so that will build overall resilience of the hydrogen network, more independent from just delivery option with centralized facility production. Makes
sense, yeah. This is kind of a dumb question, so it's good that it comes from me. Is hydrogen a better generator of heat than electricity? Because I've been talking to a lot of folks in Europe, and when the word hydrogen comes up, heat is the next thing. So is it better, the same, worse? Bob?
Boy, I'd have to think through that one in terms of, there's issue of economics, there's an issue of, energy efficiency, issue of, infrastructure. You've got to, pipe hydrogen around. You can use hydrogen to create heat, but then you have to pump that heat around a building. So same with electricity. My gut reaction is that in the longer term, hydrogen is more efficient in creating heat, heat for a building. But maybe Professor Blechman can add to that.
David?
Well, there is no good answer. And the answer is it depends on what you're looking for. If you're producing optic fiber, hydrogen is the best heat because it's a clean and there are no other radicals, for example, and it's a very high temperature that you need to produce and draw the fiber. But if you're talking about a building, a person would run application would run hydrogen through fuel cell first, producing electricity, and utilize waste heat for heating up the building, just like Han Solow house is doing. And so that's it's 100% utilization. You utilize heat because fuel cells are not 100% efficient. They're 50-60% efficient. So there is always heat at about 90 degrees Celsius that's available. And so for buildings, it's perfect. But if you're talking about high temperature heating, then burning of hydrogen is also very good because it's clean. Well, and electricity, again, there is this phasing or usage. You're storing it how long? You're storing it for a day or you're storing it for seasons, right? So you cannot get enough batteries built to store it seasonally.
Well, David, you're going to have the last word on this. I'm afraid we've run out of time. First of all, I'd like to thank LADWP for helping us put these on. I'd like to thank our panelists for not only the time they spent today, but they did a lot of preparation work for this. I'd like to thank our audience for coming and spending some time with us. If you want to find out more about us, there's a link in the description. Please connect it, ask questions. We want to hear from you. We want to get involved with you. There are 2 more of these sessions scheduled currently. The next one is scheduled for the 17th of November, and that roundtable is going to be focused on India and the transition challenges that India has from going where they are now to carbon neutral future. We're going to have the CEO of Tata Power on. We're going to have the general manager of LADWP and a number of other experts on that. And that's going to happen November 17th, time to be determined. And the next one after that will probably be focused on Australia and the hydrogen challenges and opportunities that Australia has. So with that, folks, thank you very, very much for coming. And I look forward to talking to you and seeing you again.